I hate when that happens. Thank y'all, man, because I hate when people do that. They come in and the microphone ain't working. You know what I mean? Anyway, thank you guys for coming out. I'm going to go ahead and thank a few people. Continue for coming out. Black Man Unfiltered. Who else do we have in the building? Time as always. Thank you for coming out. And we also have Antoine. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We got King in the building. What's happening? Let's see who else. Oh, yeah. There we go. There we go. He said start the show over. I ain't doing that. We here now. Listen. So the intro is there. Let's. They want to see it again. I tell y'all, well, let's do it one more time for posterity. There we go. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Come on inside and get yourself something cool to drink.
There we go. There we go. Much, much better. Normally, when we do sound check, it's both of us in here, so we can check. But it's just me tonight, so you know, you got to be extra careful. Listen, I want to thank you guys for coming out to the inaugural launch of Between the Lines podcast. Listen, one of the things I wanted to talk to you guys about, sometimes in life, man, we always miss stuff. You know, there's always something that itches that just doesn't feel right. Well, tonight we're going to talk about a few things that we see in these YouTube streets all the time. You know, we talk about relationships and stuff like that. And there's always one thing that we don't always get right, but it's always sticking in the back of your mind. It's like, something about that don't sound right. And, you know, for the most part, most people will bring up their stuff and don't have no information to back it up. They're just how they feel. Well, last week, me and Arpain and a few of the guys were talking in the barbershop. We're talking about bettering ourselves as men. And we were talking about making sure that we don't always have all the information. And foresight was one of the things that we hit on that says, hey, man, you know, why don't we start using foresight a little bit so we can plan out our futures and stuff like that. And I was telling us, you know, hindsight is always 20/20, man. And we rarely get an opportunity to look back on something after time has passed. Because think about it, when you're in the future, in your present, you got the comfort of having the past to look back on. And to navigate the future, you got to pretty much plan. And sometimes things don't always go as planned. So what we talked about was marriage. And sometimes the purpose of marriage. Here's the thing. I go around from time to time and I watch people's podcasts. And one of the things that stick out to me is that the women are always talking about, you know, women only got married for survival. And to me, that just didn't seem right. Since the beginning of time, women have always gotten married. But in some instances, they would say, you know what, I couldn't, you know, get a bank account, or I couldn't, you know, secure a car loan or whatever, and credit and all this other stuff. And I was like, man, that's wild, man. Women have always had money. You know what I'm saying? So what I did was I did a little bit of research, and I've been working on this for the past few months because sometimes some of this stuff is hard to come by. The internet is scrub stuff. Some stuff is not allowed. I had to go to the archives, and find some of this stuff. Now, one of the myths that I've heard was that women only got married for survival and not success. And I thought that was kind of weird because a lot of women that I knew got married because they loved their husband or whatever, and they built strong families, that type of thing. And of course, you can't ignore the fact that some people did get married for survival. This how some people came up. You married a rich dude and then you divorced him and you go on about your merry way. Well, here's my thing. Sometimes I think the truth is somewhere in the middle. And I think sometimes we need to explore that to figure out exactly what happened. So the main tenet that women were using was the fact that women only got married because they couldn't get bank accounts. Let's explore that tonight. That's one of the sections. This is actually a part of a 3-part series. So tonight I'm going to bring up a series that you guys may or may not have seen. This happened when I was maybe 1 or 2 years old, maybe 3 years old. This is old, y'all. So I had to go back and find out exactly what happened. Just to give you a little context, I found a video of a women's program from the 70s. And it talks about women's having their own credit unions, because back in the day, women could only not get their own checking accounts or whatever. That happened around about the 60s. I got some stuff that backs all that up. So I like to cite my work so you can find that stuff. So we're going to go back and watch this. And it's talking about these two women who brought up, and they were talking about how the feminist movement allowed women to get bank accounts or whatever. Now, I will say this. The feminist movement was good because it allowed women to get the right to vote, fairness on jobs, that type of thing. But then again, there's some things that I have to question, and I'm going to have to go back and look on it. So tonight's lesson, I'm going to tell y'all to get a piece of paper and a pen, because there will be a quiz at the end of the show. And based upon what we have, I'm going to show you that some of this stuff was good and some of this stuff was bad. So tonight's show, I'm going to go ahead and give it. This is a show from the 70s called Woman. And I'm going to start playing this for you guys. I'm going to give you an opportunity to find out exactly what's going on and how some of these talking points actually begin. Because very rarely do you get an opportunity to see a talking point being formed. Well, this is the birth of that particular talking point. So I'm going to go ahead and add this to the stage, and we're going to take a look at it. And I'm going to stop it, play it, you know what I mean? Comment on it a little bit, and ask you guys some questions in the chat. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask.
Woman, an in-depth exploration of the world of women today with Sandra Elkin.
Good evening and welcome to Woman. Tonight we conclude our 4-part mini-series on women and money with a discussion of women's banks and credit unions. With me is Joanne Parent. Joanne is a co-founder of the Feminist Federal Credit Union in Detroit and a member of the Board of Trustees of the Feminist Economic Network. FEN is an organization formed to further develop growth of feminist enterprises. Also with me is Madeline McQuinney. Madeline is president of the First Women's Bank in New York City. She's also a director of Investors Research Responsibility Center, which is Carnegie Corporation and Charles Kettering Foundation sponsored. Welcome to both of you. Madeline, did I get that right?
That's close enough.
Okay. What do you think led to the fact that we now have women's banks and credit unions? What was the economic situation that led us to this point?
Well, I think that the feminist movement, certainly with the emphasis on control over our own lives, led us there. the fact that as women, we wanted to have economic independence and control over our own lives, and we went to the local bank or the local credit union, and were not able to get the credit that we deserve, led us to the fact that we now have feminist credit unions and women's banks.
Do you agree with that, Madeline?
Yes, definitely. And as more and more women have moved into the labor market, up the ranks into better and better jobs, or starting their own businesses, they really needed financial help, and they just weren't getting it.
How did the first women's bank begin?
It began with two women who'd been very active on the political front, working on problems of employment discrimination, trying to get the big banks to let women into their management training programs, and trying to get laws passed, at least in the New York State legislature, outlawing discrimination in credit on the basis of sex. These two women decided that while those were important objectives to pursue politically, that if they took a positive step forward, started a bank which would be non-discriminatory in its approaches, but that would make a special effort to serve the feminine constituency, that they could achieve their objectives much more rapidly and much more effectively.
Women won't get special treatment, but they'll get equal treatment. Is that it? Is that
They
kind
get equal treatment, but we are, I would say, while we're not lending to a woman just because she's a woman, we are making a special effort to help women, because I think in our culture, for many reasons, women have not had the same access to financial information and financial training. And I see this particularly in women starting new businesses. They come in without really adequate knowledge of the kind of information that we need to help them. And we have to work with them in a much greater level of detail than we would with the normal man starting a small business.
All right, y'all. Here's the point that I really like. She said that she wants to educate women on money and how money works. That's generally how these organizations start. That was the whole purpose and premise, to make sure that women had the knowledge, because back then women didn't have the access to how money was actually made, distributed, how it worked, functioned. So her role in this particular situation was to actually educate women. And her question was it special treatment? I like how she answered this, so I'm going to continue.
I think the equal
Right.
treatment is special treatment in a society where it's not the norm.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
What about the Detroit Credit Union?
Well, I think that it came from women who, again, were politically active in the feminist movement. Myself and Valerie Angers, we were involved in various kinds of activities working on the rape issue, and we're very interested in the whole gynecological self-help movement and how it taught us, through self-examination, to have better control over our bodies and demystify our bodies and learn what was going on. And in the same sense, we felt, we've got to find ways in which we can demystify this whole financial system and have better control over the money that we do have. And we began looking into different kinds of financial institutions, and felt that the credit union form would not only be very easy to start, that it sort of did fit the concepts of the feminist movement, in the sense that you have to be a member of a feminist organization in order to join the credit union. And so we applied for a credit union charter.
All right, y'all. Y'all heard that. This is another bullet point. She said you had to be a member of the feminist movement to be a member of the credit union. Just so you guys know, for those who just came in, they're talking about the feminist credit union and banks that they made for women back in the day. And she's getting into talking about what you had to do to become a member. That's very important.
This was back in August of 73, or June of 73, and we got the charter in August of 73.
Madeline, how long did it take from the time that someone had the idea to start a women's bank until you actually opened your doors?
Nearly 3 years. Getting a bank charter is a long, slow process under any circumstances.
A little more complicated than a credit union, it sounds.
Right, yeah. Ours was only complicated in the sense that it was the first feminist credit union, and that the National Credit Union Administration, which issues credit union charters, had never really heard of feminist organizations, and we had to do a little bit of education and training down there to explain to them what feminist groups were and how they operated and so forth. And so it took more time than the usual credit union charter, but it worked out.
I can just hear a conversation like, you'll never believe who came into the office today, some crazy women.
Right, yeah, sure.
Madeline, what were some of the problems that you can talk about? with starting a
I
bank?
think the basic problems that we faced in starting the bank um, were the economic recession and the problems we had in remodeling our site. Because getting a bank charter under any circumstances is a slow process because the banking department has to review the histories of all the people involved to be sure that there's no underworld or any other kind of bad influence of that sort. And then once that is cleared, then you have to raise your capital, and then you have to staff your bank, and we have to get all the staff, at least the senior members of the staff, approved with the banking department to be sure that we had people that were competent and able to run the bank. Then we had to start our remodeling, and the site we picked is in a very good spot for women. It's where there's lots of retail business. It's where there's lots of employment of large firms, and it's near a residential area too. But it was in an old building, and it needed a great deal of work. And we had only 6 months in which to do that remodeling. We couldn't start it until after the charter was granted, and we had to be open within 6 months. So the two things took a lot of time.
Are women's money needs different than men's?
I want to take a time out to give you guys a snapshot of what's really going on around this particular time. She mentioned earlier that there was an economic recession going on back in this particular area, which made it very hard for people to get a hold of money. And especially since Nixon took us off the gold standard, they kind of did something funny with the money. So it was kind of hard for them to get it started. So I thought I'd throw that in context too, because sometimes you have to realize the whole picture of what's going on when they're doing certain things in history, because that's very, very important. And it also dovetails in the success and the failures of ventures during that particular moment in time.
I don't think so. I mean, we all have to survive in the same society, and we all need the basic consumer items that help us survive better. And I don't really think that our loan portfolio is that different than, another kind of lending institution that primarily lends to men.
No, I think they're the same. I think that the only difference and the only problem is that women have not had access to the same kind of knowledge. And perhaps it's that women are also more willing to admit that they don't know some of the answers.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that's come out on almost each of the programs that we've done on women and money is that women really fear money and they're not comfortable with it. And various people have, put forth various theories as to why that's true. And I'd be curious, to know what your response is. I mean, why are women so terrified
I think you're
to deal
always
with money?
afraid of something that you don't know, or you tend to be afraid of something that you don't know. And women have seen friends of their mothers that have had very bad experiences, widows that have gotten into all kinds of problems, divorcees that have had a lot of problems, women starting businesses that couldn't get financing, and I think this is why they're afraid. But one of the things that the bank is trying to do, and certainly credit unions and others help greatly in this provision of education, is to do more counseling and more education than the normal bank does. And we have a library that's just getting underway. It isn't where we want it yet, but that will be devoted to consumer and financial information, with a library in there that can tell you where to go for help. Because I think this is something that's very important to women.
Let's stop right there. How many times have you guys had a bank to sit down with you and showed you how money works? How to become a customer. That's something that people really don't do these days. You know what I mean? Yeah, these are the feminist women who wanted to start this. So yes, they did start a feminist credit union and a whole bunch of banks, and we'll get into that in just a moment. But she was in good intentions on helping women to understand how money works, especially during a time where the money was mostly controlled by men. And I don't understand why the men didn't really sit down with the women and explain to them how money works. So that's one of those things we have to start taking a look at, especially going forward. That's the reason why we're taking a step back to figure out exactly what was going on during that time that led us to where we're here now. Because sometimes people will resist things and not even know why they're resisting it. So that's the reason why for this show today. So I'm going to go ahead and let her do her thing and rock out and answer our questions.
Will you also eventually offer counseling, investment counseling,
Yes.
and all kinds of services
We
like
haven't
that?
started a trust department yet, but we will be doing that too.
And if I come in and say, would you balance my checkbook, will you be able to do
We'll
that
certainly
too?
help you.
Well, the key is for you to be able to balance your own. And
That's true.
for us to explain it in such a way that we never have to explain it again.
Mhm.
That, because basically the whole idea about balancing the checkbook is that somehow it's something that's too difficult for women to really be able to understand. And what we found about the credit union is it's just amazingly simple. That financial institutions, made to seem like it's something that's beyond our comprehension and much too difficult, but really it's just that we haven't had the same kind of access. I mean, it's just like, the young boy who grows up and his father's tinkering with his car, and he, it becomes natural to him because it's easy to tinker with a car when he grows up because he's had all this experience, and it's been natural that he should be able to play with cars, and we should be able to play with money and use money and invest it and learn all the ins and outs of it. And we can. It's just a question of teaching ourselves. And
we're also making a special effort to simplify banking for everybody.
Right. Yeah.
And take as much of the paperwork out of it as we can.
Can you give me an example of some of the things?
Well, one of the things that we're doing, which has been very well received, is our personal checking program. The personal checks that we're using have a carbon to them, a carbonless carbon, so that when you write a check, you've written a copy automatically. People get to the end of the month and they forget to fill in their stubs. They don't know how much money they've got in the bank or to whom they wrote the check. So they've got that copy right there. And then we're filing the checks for them. We're not returning personal checks. But if you need a copy of a check for proof of payment purpose, you can call us up and give us the number of the check and approximately when it cleared the bank, and we can get you a microfilm copy of it immediately.
I think that that's really fascinating because that is very similar to a program that we're into, which is called Share Drafts, and it's a truncated system.
Mm-hmm.
Truncated just means that it ends. You don't get that copy back, and we do have the carbonless copy, and we are the smallest credit union that is involved in this program. And as soon as we found out about it, we were so excited because it is such an easy system. And I was on a conference call with a whole bunch of credit union managers talking about the program, and I mentioned, because I had been in New York, and you call it the unforgettable check.
Right.
And I mentioned that the only bank that I know that's doing this is the Women's Bank, and they said, "Oh yeah."
We had a terrible.
You know what? At the time, this was unheard of. Just to let you guys know, sometimes there are innovations that are birthed out of accident. Back in the day, I used to work for the bank. We worked in data processing, and we had these big sorters called 3890 IBM sorters. And what it does is sorted out the checks using the Micker ink that's at the bottom of checks. Those numbers, it's called magnetic ink character recognition. So what happens is these things fly through the sorter. They separate and they go into different pockets. Some pockets go to different banks. Some checks go to the Fed Reserve. We'll wrap that stuff up and send it up to them, send it where it needs to go. This is predating that. So I don't want you guys to get too hung up on the technology of it, but just know for a fact that this was the precursor to what I was working on. And this was in the early 90s. So that lets you know that sometimes out of birth of a good thing will come stuff like technology and stuff like this. So yeah, this is in the early 70s, and this is at the beginning when she was talking about carbonless copies of checks and allow people to balance their checkbooks. Remember, back in the day, there were no computers. So everything, they did have computers, but it wasn't like what we have right now, where you just type in on your screen and all this other stuff, or you can pull it up or call your bank and say, how much money do I have in my bank? Because you never knew what checks were outstanding, what cleared. So you have to call your bank or you have to balance the checkbook. This is very, very old school and very, very manual. I don't know about y'all, but anytime you do manual stuff like that, it's always tedious. And the more you have to do something that's manual, the less you want to do it. So I can see why sometimes people will not want to fool with their checkbook because they have to, find the checks, find out which check is missing, log it out and all this other stuff. So it was very, very tedious. And what she was saying is in this particular situation, in this technology that they're working on, the Feminist Bank was the only one that had this particular technology. And then there was, sharing it with other banks. So there are good things that come out of situations like this. So I thought I'd point that out to you. That's a part of the quiz too.
Time trying to talk any checkbook company into doing this for us. And now the program's going over so well. They would originally only even do just one style for us, but now they're willing to talk about doing other styles and other colors. And we even had a call from New Zealand the other day asking about the check. So, we're doing a lot of other things to try and make banking simpler and understandable and not take time and be fun.
What kind of people apply to the credit union? Who are the women who come there and ask for money?
Women that need loans, women that are supporting themselves. That question is difficult to answer because then you have to start going down the list and categorizing all the different kinds of women that come in because they're just amazingly different.
So you're not really catering to one class, one race, that kind of thing. It's not a very special kind of thing.
No, we again had no idea of what kinds of women would come, but it just seems that all of us have needs, and all of us need to borrow money, and every walk of life and income bracket and ethnic background come to the credit union.
Madeline, what kind of services are you getting calls for most? Are you offering, more women are coming in and opening savings accounts, checking accounts, asking?
Right across the spectrum. We've developed a lot of corporate business, as we've been advertising in the New York Times, showing the major corporations that have been supporting us. But our deposit business is coming from both men and women, again, right across the economic spectrum and right across the ethnic spectrum. The majority of our loan clients, our customers, 90% of the installment loans are going to women. Women are in the majority of our commercial customers too, but not anywhere near so high a majority. Investment advice, help with financial problems, rank high on the numbers of types of questions we get. And we're also getting a great many calls for help, or at least we're seeing that people need help in the accounting area. People that come in looking for loans just haven't put the material together in a fashion that's not needed. Sometimes they realize it and sometimes they don't. But this is obviously an area where women need help, is good accounting.
You both probably have had some sort of response from the male-run counterparts of your institutions. I mean, do you think you're affecting some kind of change? Do you think the fact that there are women's credit unions and women's bank is going to end discrimination?
Well, I think the fact that the new federal regulations came down certainly was the effect of the fact that women were going to say, if you don't want to lend to us, then we will get it together and lend to ourselves. And I think that when that business starts being taken away, that's when the banks are not going to put up such a big lobby against better legislation, so that we have alternatives when we are turned down for credit, that we can, then that, I think it's amazing when these regulations came through, the applications had to change so much. And we didn't have to make a single change on our loan application, but these credit unions, that we work with, they were just running around like crazy trying to figure out how to devise an application and still be as sexist as they wanted to be and yet comply with the regulations.
One of the purposes of the bank is to prove that this is good, profitable business, and we hope the other banks will copy us. And we're already seeing an impact in the ads of other New York City banks.
All right, here we go. I want to stop that for a moment. She said the purpose was to show that this bank was profitable. And I think sometimes, man, people get into their feelings when it comes down to money. Basically, all banking is whether or not the bank can make money. It has nothing to do with sexist or race or anything like that. It's, hey, can I make money off of this? And we're going to get into that as well, too. So y'all pay attention. That's going to be a part of the quiz.
Are you taking risks, either of you, that, the other institutions wouldn't take? I mean, really,
we're
it's
lending money to some people that other institutions have refused to lend money to, but I don't think we're taking risks. Our portfolio really, I think, is quite conservative, but we're working with our customers to find ways that we can help them.
So really, it's an attitudinal thing. I mean, the other people, by refusing to lend, are not taking risks.
Yeah, I would say that, there are certain kinds of, in our portfolio, though this is not the majority of it, and portfolio is just a big word for, all our loans in the file cabinet there. And the loans that we have, there are some that could be considered high risk, but to us maybe are not high risk, because that, one of the things is character. And, if someone comes in who's been very involved in the feminist movement and maybe is going to start out a new enterprise or a business, we know that this person has been reliable and has been,
it's the advantage of a credit union, you know your people.
Right. Yeah, that is one of the advantages, is being able to give loans on that character.
Let me ask y'all something, man. How many of y'all have been given a loan based upon your character? Just out of curiosity. That is one of the things that I think that we probably need to start thinking about as far as when it comes to money, because it's one of those situations where people want to say, hey, look, that's not really good business. You know what I'm saying? But we'll get into that in a minute. She asked the lady, what type of risk are you taking? And if you think about it, back in 2008, when we had the housing crisis, when they were doing those subprime loans or whatever for housing, you would think that they would have learned from the 70s about credit risk and make sure that they didn't do this in the 2008s when this happened. And you know, the killing part about it is you would think that we would know better, but this particular cycle continues to happen over and over again because people are not educated. So I'm using time as a method to have you guys to look back in time to show you exactly the types of mistakes that we make with money over time, to let you know that people without education will continue to make the exact same mistakes. So based upon somebody's character and giving them a loan, that's not really good business. So I'm going to let her continue with that.
And not just the collateral and the ability to pay, although those are important considerations that you can pay it back, you know. So.
Speaking of collateral, I think most women think they don't have any.
Yeah, well, we sure get that question a lot. I mean, when we say, well, do you have any collateral? They say, well, what is collateral, you know? And we found a lot of times that we tell a woman, you know, she said, well, yeah, we have 2 cars in the family, but they're both in my husband's name. And, you know, so we say, well, go down to Secretary of State and get one of them changed over to your name so that you have something to back up this loan. And I think, you know, that's a good educational thing too, that women are beginning to see the need to get collateral in their own
name. You would take one of your husband's cars, put it in your name, and use that as collateral to spend more money or to get a loan. I don't know about y'all, but to me, that just doesn't seem right. That's like building your brand with somebody else's money. You know what I mean? That you didn't earn. To me, something like that just doesn't sit right. So those are some of the things that you have to take a look at. Yes, it sounds good in theory. Yes, it gets the ball rolling or whatever, but taking somebody else's vehicle or the family vehicle and not having a discussion with that person and then taking it down to the state and just say, hey, look, this is my car. And then sashay into the bank and say, hey, I want to take out a loan based upon my car. You see what I'm saying? That's kind of bad business once you think about it. How trustworthy is that?
And have a credit rating in their own name.
Right.
How do you establish a credit rating in your own name? If you're married and if everything is...
Well, if you have a department store account in Mary Jones instead of Mrs. John Jones, that's the easiest way to do it because most women shop someplace where they have credit arrangements. And if you have a charge account in a store, or if you're living by yourself and have a telephone, you pay your telephone bills regularly. I've seen people or heard people say go take out a small loan someplace to do it, but you don't need to do that. Just in your ordinary everyday life, there's some place that you're buying where you buy on credit or may buy on credit, and that's the easiest way to do it.
Yeah, I think that, you know, one of the things that we've seen, though, is that financial institutions won't often pay much attention to the fact that you've been paying your phone bill regularly for this many months because it's not reported to a credit bureau as such, whereas the charge card thing is probably the best, especially with these new regulations that they have to, if you're in a marriage situation, you're both equally responsible for paying the charge or for running up the charge for that matter, that they have to report to the credit bureau in your name. Because almost all our lending, I mean, we just check with the credit bureau. We don't bother to call the phone company or the gas company and so forth.
The easiest is to check with the credit bureau because then you've got the record right there.
What are things that a woman can expect from a bank? I mean, a woman should be able to go to a bank and take out a loan without anyone co-signing, right? Within reason.
Well, if she has some means of repayment.
Yes.
Whether it's a regular job or alimony or income from investments, or some kind of collateral. What the bank is looking for is there some possible way in which she can repay this credit?
And if she has that, if she has a regular job, she shouldn't have to have her father or anyone else
That's against the law
co-sign
now,
with
yeah.
her.
But if there's no other way of repaying that we can find, then a co-maker or co-signer will.
I don't know if y'all paid attention, but she said you can use alimony as a way to secure a loan too. So I didn't want that to go over y'all heads.
You turn to that.
Yeah, I think the cosigner, we consider it simply as another form of collateral. And, we do give a whole lot of signature loans, which is that, you've got the ability to pay back this loan, and that's all we care about. And, you sign your name, and
Most of
it's a
ours
good
are
loan.
unsecured. Of our installment loans are unsecured.
Yeah, so that you've got the unsecured signature loan versus the secured loan. I think on somebody's, first loan or without any established credit or
You know what? I don't know if y'all heard this or not, but if you pay attention, the older lady was like, most of our loans are unsecured loans, which means that there's no collateral backed up. It's just you go in and you sign your name on the dotted line and say, "Here you go. Here's some money." And I'm pretty sure you guys know that's probably not a good idea. So I thought I'd point that out because sometimes when people have these shows, they'll slide a little crumb of truth in there just to make sure that they cover themselves legally. But for the most part, that's very, very important when it comes to banking. Very important when it comes to banking, especially when it comes down to whether or not you should be loaning out money, especially other people's money who put their money into the banks. So I thought I'd point that out.
that we might tend to want some kind of collateral and that we try to work with women to find ways in which we can do the loan without having to get a cosigner, because it is very humiliating to be told that you have to have somebody else vouch for you, that you're not good on your own.
Are there different kinds of credit unions?
Yeah, there's employment credit unions, which I think are about 80% of the credit unions in this country, and then there the associational, which is what we are, whereas you belong to association and then you can join the credit union. And I think there's community credit unions also, a very small amount of them. And one of the things that's interesting about credit unions that we just learned the other day was that we're larger than 75% of all credit unions. And that really goes to show in our short 2.5 years, for one thing, how fast we've grown, but another thing, that credit unions are often very small, limited institutions that don't seek to grow. But that 25%, though,
They
that
serve a particular plant or a
Yeah.
particular church or a particular group.
Right.
It's just membership is relatively limited.
Is
right.
the loan company on the corner a credit union?
No,
What is
definitely
that?
not.
See, that was credit unions have a very interesting development, because they were formed just because of the loan company on the corner, where commercial banks at one time were not doing as much consumer installment lending, and the only place that individual people had to go to get loans for durable consumer goods was these outrageous loan sharks and finance companies that charged 25 and, well, at that time maybe even higher, 36 and 46% interest. And that
Notice she said that most people were getting durable consumer goods. Most of y'all guys probably know that durables are things like washing machines, dryers, automobiles, stoves, those type of things. Things that's supposed to last a long time, and sometimes it may take you a while to pay over. That's the reason why Sears back in the day was so popular. You would, open up the Sears catalog and you would point to it and say, "Hey, look," and call it up. I want to have me a stove delivered to my house. They run your little, store card or whatever and deliver it, and then you would pay over time. They'll send you a little book out or whatever. That's back in the day. I'm pretty sure they'll do stuff like that now, but as you can see, Sears is barely in business. I think they still sell appliances, but not to the magnitude of what they used to have back in the day. Back in the day, Sears used to sell whole house kits. Those houses that your granddaddies y'all used to brag on your granddaddies about, them houses like $3,000. You know what I'm saying? 2-3 bedroom bungalows that they usually put up in about a week. And that was the house your granddaddies put your grandmama in, that type of thing. So those was the root of how they did credit unions, and they did store credit and stuff like that. So I thought I'd bring that to your attention. Pull that up, and we're going to continue.
credit unions developed as a result were, in fact, the man that came to our organizational meeting, he said, credit unions are for the little guy. And, here it was in a group of women, starting the first feminist credit union. And so in that sense, the same way that women have been ignored, by the lending industry that sort of went and gave us the impetus to start the credit union. Credit unions started because the banks weren't doing so much consumer lending, and the only alternative people had was finance companies, which are very high interest. And if you can get a loan at a bank or a credit union, you're a lot better off than at a finance company.
Madeline, there are different kinds of banks. There are commercial
The word
banks.
bank is probably badly used because there are commercial banks, there are savings banks, there's something called a savings loan association, which a lot of people think is a bank. It really isn't a bank, although it is somewhat similar in its activities to a savings bank. And then there are banks that are chartered by the federal government and chartered by the state government. So there's lots of variety in our banking industry, although I think over the next decade that will change greatly, and that the lines of differentiation will melt. I think that the difference between a thrift institution and a commercial bank is going to change, and I think even the credit unions may come closer in the type of business.
What is the difference between a thrift institution and a commercial institution now? You're a commercial
We're
bank.
a commercial bank. We're doing commercial loans, personal loans. We're not doing mortgage loans yet. We will as we get a little bigger. A savings bank cannot have checking accounts. They only can take time accounts, and they're very limited in the type of loans that they can make. In most places, they cannot make consumer loans. They can make mortgage loans, but not for purchase of a car or to pay the dentist or make a vacation or something of that sort.
So it's important to know what the
The
institution is.
reason
Yeah.
that the founders of our bank went to the commercial charter is so that they could provide help outside the membership organization, particularly in the commercial loan field, and in the trust department field.
Let me ask you a question. We often see banks are doing a lot of advertising these days, offering free premiums, toasters and aluminum bowls and things like that, and free checking accounts. Is that true? Is there such a thing as a free checking account? I mean, doesn't it cost?
Well, the checking account definitely costs the bank something. There's no question about that. But there are a few banks in the country, and very few, that have genuinely free to the customer checking accounts. But they're very few.
It's never really free because the money that you have in the checking account is being used by the bank to loan out to make
Well,
money.
there
and
are
so-
some banks. I can think of one in New York City, for example.
Uh-oh. I find it every time that the younger lady gets to talking, and the older lady has to go back and clean it up. She let the cat out the bag. Now earlier, this lady just said that you can't just lend out money or whatever. And then the young one was like, well, we take the money out and we lend it to other people. And now she got to go back and kind of clean it up after she just told her that's not what they did. So I thought I'd point that out to you guys.
Where you can keep $1 in the account and keep the account and keep it free, but that's not
True.
usual. Not
Yeah.
usual. The
But-
bank asks either service charges or a balance in order to pay the cost of maintaining that account.
But what I'm saying is that the bank doesn't pay you interest like it would on a savings account on that checking
No,
account.
because it cannot by law.
Yes,
But I think that is going to be changing too, and the laws have changed very recently with respect to small businesses. Small businesses may now start savings accounts, which they never could before, and they can transfer funds in and out of those savings accounts very readily. So that the amount of demand deposits that a business keeps now is much smaller than it used to.
What if a woman runs into some discrimination? What recourse does she have?
Well, she can go to a lawyer and tell her story. And we refer to a lot of women lawyers in our area that are familiar with the credit legislation, and I think they can give her the best advice as to whether or not she has a case. What the unfortunate thing about is that, again, when we are turned down like this, it's the humiliation that really affects us, rather than, I mean, what we say is come to the credit union and get your loan, and then go to the lawyer, and
The
So
grievance
to get a bigger
procedures
loan
exist,
then.
but they're slow.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, New York State, New York City, and the federal government all have procedures which you can go through. But if you really need the loan, as you say, you might as well try another place,
yeah.
try another institution, because you probably get it.
What is the legislation? I mean, earlier you referred to the recent legislation. I mean, can you be more specific about it?
Well, in Michigan, we had a credit law before the federal legislation, and then I believe it was Bella Abzug's bill she was one of the.
There were a number of people that worked on it.
Yeah, and then
Lenore Sullivan.
yeah,
Mm.
so it's a women in credit discrimination. I'm not familiar with all the terms, but I know that the regulations came out and
It went into effect the
in October.
28th of October this past year.
And that all financial institutions had to, in credit granting institutions, had to comply with these regulations. And I think it's real good. I think it's a good step.
Madeline, have you always been involved in economics? I mean, have you ever been president of a bank before?
No, there aren't very many women that are presidents of banks, although the number is growing, fortunately. No, I had my training is as a financial economist, and I'd been with the Federal Reserve Bank before I joined this group.
What about you, Joanne?
Well, I don't have any training in any financial thing. Like I said, I come out of the feminist movement, and I had various kinds of jobs, and that, you know, Valerie and I just decided that this was something that we wanted to do, and worked with a number of other women who wanted to do this. And again, I just can't say how amazingly simple it is if we want to learn and we want to take control over things, that we can do it if we put our minds to it. That the world is a lot simpler than we've been led to believe by men who want to keep control of it. So.
I think that's the thing that amazes me most about, we were sitting in my office earlier, Madeline, and Joanne was saying, it's easy, it's easy. All you have to do is just start one. And, you know, that's such an unheard of thing. I mean, we haven't had people telling us
Finance
it's easy.
is not that complicated.
Yeah. Wouldn't it be interesting, and I don't know if you've maybe thought about this, but there really isn't a place where women learn about money. Can you imagine, you know, elementary schools teaching
They are
kids about
beginning
money?
to. You're beginning
Really?
to get economics classes really down into the kindergarten area. Nowhere near enough of it, but it is beginning.
What do you think are the
You know, let me ask you a question. Do your kids, those who have kids, do your kids actually have economics classes? I'm telling you, when we came up, we didn't have that in kindergarten. You know, we had coloring and all this other stuff, you know, and Lego blocks. We didn't talk about economics. And that was right around this same time that we're saying that they were introducing this stuff. So that's the main reason why I'm glad I'm able to speak to this, because I don't remember doing that. And I don't remember thinking about doing econ until we got to high school. And by then, it's almost too late. That's the reason why you have to be able to teach girls and boys on how money works. And I think that's the main reason why we have these money fights. You know what I'm saying? When we start talking about the breadwinner and all this other stuff, and it's all about control and power, I think it all comes down to whether or not that person has an understanding of how money really works. And in this particular situation, they're trying to show to us that during this particular time, women didn't really know or were educated when it comes down to money. But now, if you fast forward to 2025, some of these conversations that we're having still exist. So that lets me know that women aren't getting the information that they should be getting. Somehow the men are getting the information, but somehow the women aren't. So I'm trying to figure out exactly how does that work? So that's the main reason I wanted you guys to take a look at this, to show you that we're still having the same exact arguments. And my thing is, I want us to come together so we don't let money be a reason why we shouldn't be together. You know what I'm saying? So I'm going to go ahead and let them continue.
most important things that women should know about money? What to do with their money? Let's make it that.
Well, one of the things that we've been stressing is financial planning, because I think too many women just drift with respect to finances. And your plan may change over your life as your interests and priorities change, but I think from the time you start your first job, you ought to have some kind of an idea where you're going, so that you set aside certain amounts for liquidity purposes, emergency purposes, and then you begin to invest what you can in a specific program. And then as you get married or have children or your interests change, you may change that plan. And the economy may make things different for you too, but you should have a plan and know where you're going.
You know, a shout out to King and me. The other day he had a podcast and we were talking about asking women always ask men what their 5-year plan is. And we were saying that men never ask women what their 5-year plan is, because usually we're their 5-year plan. And I thought about it. I said, this lady here was spot on. She was saying that women should also have a 5-year plan, and it shouldn't include the guy. If you have your own money, you should have your own plan. You know what I mean? If you're going to have your own family, that type of thing, you should be planning for this type of stuff. And I think sometimes these people are on this stuff, and we just got to start paying attention to what's really going on.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, again, when we talk about you having control, you know, the first thing comes from what do I want? And then you find out how to do it.
Same
And
true with your career. It shouldn't drift. You should have some goals and ideas where you want to go.
Thank you both. We're out of time. Thank you both for coming. Thank you for watching, and good night.
here's the thing. That's the reason why I wanted to show you guys some of this stuff, because some of the things that we argue about are only because we have lack of knowledge. Now, let's find out exactly what happened to the feminist credit unions. And I got a slideshow, and we're going to go through and remember that pop quiz we talked about. We're going to start pulling up some of that stuff, and I want you guys to see exactly what happened. And that way we can actually start planning ahead of time so we can head off some of these things that happened to us. Now, on the first one, this is the feminist credit unions. And this is actually straight from Wikipedia. You guys can find this on your own, but I decided to pull it up, and I'm going to go ahead and go for some of this stuff with you so that way you know exactly what happened. So that way what they were telling us actually jives from what actually happened. This says the feminist federal credit unions, the FFCUs, are credit unions founded by feminists to address discriminatory practices in banking and loan, which was correct. United States feminist credit unions rose to prominence during the 1970s, which we just talked about earlier. The first feminist credit union, which was also the oldest women's financial organization, was founded in Detroit, Michigan, just like she said earlier, August 26, 1973, which is the anniversary of women's suffrage. That's very important. The Detroit FFCU was co-founded by Valerie Angers and Joanna Parent, who were feminists that sought to create services for women and controlled by women. The main goal of the FFCU was to offer freedom in banking and loan institutions from discriminatory based on sex, marital status, or credit rating of the woman's husband or father. Only women reviewed a woman's loan application. Only women reviewed a woman's loan application. Interesting. And these loans were used for a variety of things such as cars, homes, divorces, abortions, and funding for movements towards self-fulfillment. I'm gonna let that one sink in for a minute. They were taking out loans to do cars, homes, divorces. Yeah, you see it. And funding for movements towards self-fulfillment. So it really wasn't based in family. It was really based in self-fulfillment. If you think about it, if you look at our relationships these days, it really lends itself around self-fulfillment, selfishness. It's not always about what can I do for the family? It's about self-fulfillment. I think that is a clue, y'all. I'm gonna let y'all sit on that one. Write that down and take a picture and marinate on that. Now, women also use their loans to help with other feminist movements. For example, 1976, Carol C.J. and Paul Wallace received a loan from the San Francisco Federal Credit Union to start a feminist bookstore called Old Wives' Tale. You can't make this stuff up. You cannot make this stuff up. Old Wives' Tale is the name of the bookstore. Now, the FCCU also focused on teaching financial literacy to women who never were allowed to manage money before. That's a good thing. You know, anytime you teach people how to manage money, you would think that they would appreciate other people with money because they saw what it went to make it. So I think that's always a good thing. Anytime you want to educate somebody, that's a good thing. Now, women for decades faced discriminatory practices in loan and credit industry. FFCU rose due to the shift in conceptions of women's rights. Okay. Now, in 1974, Congress passed, this is what she was talking about earlier about what was passed in Congress. Congress passed an Equal Credit Opportunity Act, ECOA, which made it illegal for banks and lenders to discriminate based on sex or marital status. Now, despite this, women were still considered to be second-class financial citizens and combated their economic standing by turning to women-only or women-centered financial institutions. So they were decentering men way back in the 70s. So pay attention to that, y'all. That's going to be on the test too. Now, prior to 1848, married women were not allowed to own any real estate. The women's husband owned any property that was hers. In addition to this, women who were married could only not acquire new property. It was during the 1960s where women were first allowed to open their own bank accounts. So this was in the 1960s. So this is what they were talking about, these bank accounts. And I don't really think it had anything to do with the bank account. As we discovered tonight, it was more along the lines of getting credit. And that's a big difference. Securing a loan is different. Getting an account. Anybody can get an account. Like the lady said earlier, you can open up an account for $1. It was getting access to more money with or without collateral, as we discussed earlier. That was the major concern. So when you hear these people with these talking points about women only got married for survival, or they couldn't open up a bank account, make sure you point this out to them. Say it really wasn't about the bank account. It was about access to credit. And that's a more nuanced conversation. Now, however, it was not until 1974 that it became illegal to require women to take out loans with a male cosigner. We talked about that tonight. And women often found themselves with larger interest rates. We talked about about the loan sharks, and higher required down payments prior to this. So of course, banks want you to have some collateral. So of course, you're going to have a larger down payment. Now, the Feminist Economic Network was founded in 1975 as an alliance of several feminist credit unions in the United States. The purpose of its formation was to enhance the interlending capacities of feminist federal credit unions and encourage new credit unions to form. Now, this is how they worked. This is to go into a little bit of detail on how that works, how feminist federal credit unions worked. Now, to become a member of the FFCU, the only requirement were to sign a member application, pay the $2 member fee, and to open a shares account with a minimum of $5. All members of the National Organization of Women, which is NOW, and the Women's Liberation Coalition of Michigan, which we talked about earlier, were eligible to join the first FFCU in Detroit. Now, all of the savings at the federal feminists were insured up to $40,000 by the National Credit Union Administration, with dividend rates being up to a maximum of 7% with no minimum balance or time requirements. In addition to this, the FCCU has paid for share life insurance in the case of death, where the members' beneficiaries would receive an amount equal to the members' shares in the account, the maximum amount of insurable shares up to $2,000. There was a loan protection insurance which ensured the loan would be covered by the FFCU in case the member's death. And there was also an optional disability insurance. All of the FFCUS members and only their members were eligible for loans. That's very important, y'all. Only their members were eligible for loans. Now, one of the main criteria that was taken into account before issuing the loan was character. Remember, we talked about character earlier. This is on the test. And the ability to repay the loan. We talked about collateral. Now, the annual loan interest rate, specifically at the Detroit FCCU, was 12%. I think somebody in the chat asked what the rate was. Well, here it is. It's 12%, or 1% per month on the unpaid balance. Now, money orders were available to members at 25 cents each in the amount up to $250. Now, the FCCUs also had share drafts, which served the purpose of personal checks. We talked about that like the little press on, thing where you can keep record of your stuff. And the FCC operated similar to full service institutions due to all of these services they provided to its members. And now we get to the fun part. Well, you have to ask yourself, Lost, what happened, man? What happened to the feminist credit union? Because I don't think we have any today. And you know what? You would be right. Let's talk about disbandment. Disbandment. You know what disbandment means? That means they had to shut them down. Now, let's figure out exactly why they shut them down. And we're going to talk about this a little bit. Now, by the early 1980s, majority of the FCCUs began to disband, and some of the FFCUs underwent involuntary liquidation. In other words, they made them shut it down. Now, the National Credit Union Administration, the NCUA, was appointed to liquidate the feminist credit unions and was responsible for paying off all shares and debts. And they arranged to collect any loans that were owed to the FCCU. There were three main reasons why many of the FCCUs closed. Let's talk about it. Large debts, slow growth, and office management issues. Large debts, slow growth, office management issues. When you have large debts, that means somebody ran up a bill and didn't pay it back. Okay? That's very bad for business. I don't know about you, but you can't run a business like that. And then slow growth is one of those things where they only lend out to certain people. So that means your business is never going to grow. So if you're always spending more money than you're taking in the banking business, that's bad. You know what I'm saying? You got more debits going out than credits. That's bad. And then office management issues. Basically, that's a lack of knowledge on how stuff works. So I thought I'd point that out to you, how during the video that these were the main topics that we were talking about that caused the downfall of the FFCUs. Now, the issue of office managers was selective to certain FCCUs. For an example, the First Pennsylvania Feminist Credit Union was a temporary problem. The FFCUs prioritized trusting women rather than assessing if they were credit risk. And we talked about that, y'all, about bad business, which led to many of the loans taken out for not being paid back. And the result, the credit unions having difficult paying back their loans. Now, many of the FCCUs had racked up delinquent loans, but despite this, many of the members of the FCCUs did not consider the disbandment to be a failure. You know what that sounds like to me? If somebody forecloses on your bank, that's bad. That will be considered a failure. If you take in less money than you're spending and somebody has to take it away from you, that's a failure. So that goes back to how people like to go back and redefine what words mean. Failure means just that it did not continue. That means it no longer exists. So whenever you get into conversations with people and they start talking about redefining words, remember this little lesson right here. Words have meaning, and there's a reason why that meaning should stay the same. Now, women of the FCCUs considered these credit unions to still be a success, as the purpose of them was to catalyze the movement to equal credit. Now, I agree with that. Now, co-founder of the Connecticut Feminist Credit Union, Susan Osborne, stated that many of the immediate issues of the FFCUs sought to solve were fixed because of how effective the FCCUs were. So they had gone to work on other problems. Now, she and many of the other owners of the FCCUs thought that those closing down the credit unions was justified as the immediate problems were resolved and the FCCUs were effective and performed successfully for their main purpose. These women believed that that through the FCCS that they had changed culture, which they did, created more feminist books, which they did, had more female voices in publishing, which they did, and that was an increase in the diversity of ideas. So although there were financial reasons to the FCCU's closing, many of the women who were part of the feminist credit unions believed that they were also closing due to their success. And how they were not necessarily needed anymore, as they solved many of the immediate issues that they were looking to resolve. I don't know about y'all, but failure is failure. Now, here's the thing. That doesn't mean you can't learn from failure, because they did have some stuff that come out of it if you look back at it. But at the same time, I think it probably did more harm than good. Now, sometimes people like, women can go out and get loans, whatever. That's a good thing. Get your business up. But it also exposed the fact that we don't have enough knowledge to answer the call. So that's the main reason why when you're having these relationship issues, make sure that everybody has the same idea of what money does and how that works. And to make sure that everybody honors that other person's efforts, because that's very, very important. I don't think a lot of people go into relationships honoring somebody else's efforts. Everybody likes to use the talking points. Well, I'm the man, I'm the provider, blah, 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 blah. Or, if the woman makes more money than the man, you should do what I tell you to do. Well, it should be a team effort, one band, one sound, as security boss say, one pot. Because if you don't have enough trust to have one account, then you probably shouldn't be married. I think there's some conversations that need to be had. But I think sometimes when people have a bad relationship with money, their insecurities actually are one of those situations where they hide things from you because they think they know how money works, or they think that you would think other of them if they didn't know how it works. I think it's just one of those situations where you really need to sit down and talk about it. Just like when you go to church and you sit down and you get ready to get married and you guys have couples counseling, I think you should probably have financial counseling too. What is your idea of money? That type of thing. Because to believe it or not, I think that some people have a different idea of what the use of marriage is for. Some people say it's for survival. Some people say it's for success. But as we go along with the next couple of series, we're going to get into some more stuff. So I thought I'd go ahead and put that out there. We got a lot of work to do. But this whole the only reason why women get married was out of survival thing. I think this exercise was important for us to find out exactly where that talking point came from, so that way we can figure out exactly what we need to do to adjust that. So with that being said, I thank you guys for coming out. If you have any questions, make sure you hit me up in the comment section. We got a lot of work to do. And if you want to ask any questions or any other topics you want to talk about, we want to go into depth, make sure you leave it down in the comment sections. I like to have these conversations with you guys because it's good to flesh out your thoughts. Sometimes panels get in the way. You don't always want to get back around to your time or whatever. But I think sometimes when we have these little one-on-one sessions, it's good for us to think these things out all the way through and flesh them all the way out. So with that being said, I thank you guys for coming out. I'm going to go ahead and wrap everything up. If you have any questions, make sure you leave them in the comments section. Make sure you guys support the show. Hit the like button, hit subscribe. If this was a good show, make sure you tell somebody, man. Our purpose is to make sure that we come together and we learn how to navigate through this thing called life and to answer the questions that need to be answered without fear and without judgment. So I appreciate you guys for coming out. So that being said, thank you guys once again. Make sure you hit the like button, and thank you for coming out to the inaugural Between the Lines podcast. We talked about success, survival, and marriage. Thank you guys. Have a good evening.